Well, like Tim said, this is a trial that we've been conducting for a couple of years, and it started off, the previous Stutzman County Extension agent is doing this for her master's, and so she asked area agents to help out across the state, so that's where the project originated from. 2 years we've been doing it. In our Tri-County area, the Wells, Eddy, and Foster County, there's been 8 sites throughout those 2 years. So you can see it broken down between the two. And then I just got this from Lindsay Maddock that there's been 14 total counties and 35 field locations. And then you'll see later on as we go through this, but there's 3 locations within each field as well. So for our objectives, we want to measure the yield response of those late emerging plants. And that's going to include looking into the doubles, and we'll talk about that, as well as skips. And we're comparing those to the normally emerged plants in that field. Some people kind of maybe think, well, this is really not new information you guys are looking for, but the goal is to get some more local information. There's studies like this that have been conducted in a lot of other places across the U.S., but there hasn't really been any in North Dakota. So this is going to give producers some local data. So with our initial data collection, there was a lot of different factors that we recorded and looked into, and you can see them all listed here. But, type of planter, previous crop, insecticides applied at planting. I don't need to go through them all, but we'll talk about seeding depth also, because we did just this last year notice a little bit of variability within seeding depth. So for the first visit, this for some it was right at planting, and for some of our fields it was right at emergence. And we did our plot setup. Those plots were 30 feet in length, and then the width depended on the planter. For example, ours was at 12 rows length with a 24 row planter. So I believe across the state there was some 16 row ones that they evaluated data on. So, but we recorded our plant population per row for our first visit. So after we set up our plots, we recorded the population and came back again. Then for our second visit, which was a week later, we recounted that population and then labeled and identified newly emerged plants. Got lots of counting in, because then come the third visit, we redid that plant population again per row. We labeled those newly identified plants once again, and then we recorded the number of skips. We called a skip plants that had 12 inches or more between them. So that's what we identified as a skip. And then our doubles were less than 2 inches apart. So we also then measured the plant spacing in the most variable and the least variable row. Got down and measured each spacing between each plant in those 2 rows. Once we got done with this, hopefully you guys can see the picture all right, but this is what our one plot looked like with all of our late emergers that were identified. These are out here. The yellow circle here is just for you guys to see. That's a late emerger identified. The blue circle over here is a skip, and I don't know if you can see very well, but on each side you can see that's definitely more than the 12-inch between those 2 plants. So just kind of gives you an idea. Right down here it's really hard to see, but this was our least variable row, and you'll notice there's not very many stakes in that row. So visually you can put a visual marker on it. So then we came back in the fall for our 4th visit at harvest time, and we harvested both the most and least variable rows and weighed those. We then did a harvest on the second most and second least variable rows. And we weighed all of our doubles and skips separately, and then went into 3 ears of each of the following: normal, late, next to late, doubles, and skips. We weighed all of those individually as well. And we also took moisture and test weight when we got back to the lab. If any of you guys saw the presentation after our first year, you probably saw this chart last year. But it's from a study from the University of Minnesota. And I just placed a couple stars because it goes well with what we're looking into in this trial with our uniform emergence and uniform plant spacing. and what your potential yield increase could be. So you'd be looking at, between those two areas, potential increase of 6 to 11% in yield. And this is also from that same trial, but it compares the yield to the control of those late plants. And just for reference here, 1 leaf stage delay on every other plant takes you down to already 80% of the control. So you can really see where those late emergers are playing a big role in your yield reductions. So now getting into our local data. This is our early season data that we collected from both 2013 and 2014. And you can see our planting dates range from May 14th to June 2nd on those 7 fields. The planting rate ranged from 30,000 to 36,000, and the average was right around that 32,000 mark. Population about a month after planting ranged from 26,000 to just about 34. We had an average about 29,000. And then the plant stand ranged from 4 to 25% less, and averaged about 10% less compared to that original seeding rate. So I said we'd talk a little bit about the variability of planting seed depth, and I guess at least in our field we really noticed it in Wells County that what the farmer was aiming for wasn't exactly where he was getting his seeds set at. So I think that's something that farmers really need to start probably paying a little bit more attention to, and getting out of their pickups and looking at their fields and seeing where the seed depth is getting set at, because what you're aiming for isn't necessarily what you're getting. And that could maybe have something to do with those late emergers. So for our harvest data for the 3 counties, you'll see averages around that -45 decrease, I should say. The field compared plants that were emerged from 1 to 3 weeks in general after emergence. So the weight of those late emergers was 7 to 100% less, and so we averaged right around that 45. There you can see. We went down about 45%. Then when we look into our skips and doubles, remember our skips are more than 12 inches and doubles are less than 2. The skips were just 4% greater, and doubles averaged 19% less. So you're going to see that the late emergers are really playing a little bit bigger role in your yield reductions than maybe the variability in spacing is. This is some data I got from Lindsay Maddock. She's with from throughout the state, the entire state data from the last 2 years. And this isn't quite complete yet because she does have a little bit more data to collect. But she said we could go ahead and share it with you guys. So just keep in mind that it is subject to change. But it's average percent of weight compared to those normally emerged cobs. So for doubles, you're going down to 75%. Skips, obviously you're going to go up a little bit. They didn't have to compete as much with those that were really close to them. For the late emergers that were 7 to 10 days after emergence, go down to 73%. And the 11 to 17 days, 68%. So those that were next to late emergers, again, they had a little bit of an advantage, so you see that boost. Some more data that's statewide here. The average yield for the most variable row came in at 155, and then the least variable row came in at just about 165. And those did prove to be statistically different, so some good data we're getting. Now this is just from our Wells County field. I mentioned that we had measured the distance between each plant in those most variable and least variable rows. And so that's where this data is coming from. You'll see the blue dots are the most variable row, and then the reds are the least variable. The yellow line or orange line right here is right at 7.5, where your ideal plant spacing would be at. So you can see there is really a lot of variability in the distance between plants. Now from the data we collected, we saw that the variability in distance didn't play quite a big of a role as the late emergers did, but it's still, I guess it's something to look at, because we want to be right around here, and we've got plants that are everywhere. Keep in mind too that there's also, that goes into the least variable and most variable, it's not just the you've got your skips and doubles in there too. So there's differences in the amount of plants per row, but that has a large play on the skips and doubles. So here's some pictures of our end results. Again, some of you maybe saw these pictures from 2013 last year, but this is one of the fields in Foster County. And you've got your normal ear right at the beginning, and then a couple of your late emergers, double, and then your skip. I'm going to talk about those skips. Obviously, they, like I said before, they didn't have that competition, so you're going to likely see them be as big or bigger than your normal ear. But definitely take a look at the late emergers as we go through them and what they're giving up. So that was in Foster County. Here's last year's Wells County field. The dates changed a little bit as far as the emergers and everything, but you still see the same story being told. Okay, now we're getting into this year, 2014. Here's Eddy counties, and I guess take a look here. We've got our doubles. They're really taking a hit, and in the next picture you'll even see Foster County. This guy missed pollination even, so you can see why those late emergers are taking the big hits in yields. So to kind of summarize things up, producers really need to think about getting those planters into the shop and keeping them in good working condition. You want to make sure your environmental conditions are optimal, thinking about your soil temp and what that excess moisture might do for compaction. And maybe even it's just going to be slowing down. We had a speaker, I think there were some of you here, or not here, but in Pheasant at our winter show last week, and Troy McCowan, he really hammered hard on the importance of placing that seed in the best environment possible to maximize that yield potential. I don't know, he kind of hit home with me, but it's just amazing how many things can be overlooked, I guess. And compaction and downforce can be huge yield impactors. He talked a lot about making sure you guys are doing that prep work on those planters so you can get rid of the variability in the planting depth and spacing between plants, and then just overall variability between rows. Prices aren't where they were a couple of years ago, so we want to make sure we get the best yield that we can with the environment we've been given, I guess. So make sure you're planting where it's ready, when it's ready. This could be really hard for producers because maybe their neighbor has had their field planted a day or two, or he's rolling and they want to get rolling too. But even just differences in soil types can really play a big factor as to when you can get going. And this is nothing new to anybody. Everybody knows this, but just something to be thinking about from year to year, and just allowing yourself the time and potential to get the best yield you can. Another thing was to do stand counts and see where your problems are at. You can't fix a problem if you don't know it exists. So he said farmers need to get out of their pickups and see where the problems are lying and how that they can get better potential yields for themselves. So mostly, I guess, like what I've said, is that this study just shows us that those late emergers are really hurting people as far as the yields go. So that's kind of our summary. Next year we do want to do this again. Lindsay's trial is ending, but I guess we've enjoyed doing it as 3 agents and Greg, and so we want to continue to see what we can get for more information for our local producers, and maybe look into some other areas, I guess. Some things that we have thought of was maybe next year measuring moisture and weight of those late emergers, so you can see where that yield loss is coming from. And then also maybe even to count the numbers of late emergers per plot.
Do you see more variability on at least on fields?
I have to go back to the data here, but I
think the variability was on location. We've got rain. Every volume was different, so. And they're all, this year they're all seeded about the same time, right?
Yeah, planting dates ranged from May 15th to May 20th there. So you can see your variability just on your weight of years right there. Eddy County, their late emerge took more of a hit than the Wells County did. still averaged right around 45.
No, mine in Eddie County was mud initially.
Yeah, planting conditions, and I didn't show a picture of Wells County from this last year. It didn't quite look the same as the others, I guess, from Eddie and Foster, but we kind of concluded, I guess, between us agents and Greg talking about it, that environment, those late emergers seem to actually be a little bit smaller ear size than those emerged later on. But if you think about the spring that we had, it was really, really cold starting off, and so maybe those plants were just a little bit stunted, and then those late emergers actually had the benefit in that scenario and were able to take off. So there's, environment plays a big role too.
Did each county have its own planter, or was it the same?
The planters were all different.
And were they all gone through previous farmer road?
Farm road, yep.
We went out to their
So,
field.
Yep. Yep, and that's, so throughout the state, there's gonna be a variety of different planters, and I guess, last week, going back to our winter show talk, he had said, there's not a planter out there that's gonna do a bad job for you. It's all about how the producer does the prep and takes the time in his planting to make sure it's done correctly.